Top 5 things Nintendo fans hold sacred. Number 5, the Game Boy Micro. Number 4, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Number 3, Wiggler Wednesday. Number 2, Brad. Number 1, Metroid. Woo! Bum 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 bum. Alright, anyway. Anytime Nintendo comes out sporting a new Metroid, the internet caves in on itself because people worship this series. They love it, and as any good fan would do, they are so ready to show their support. I mean, they just put Metroid Prime on its 4th console in a row, and it sold 1 million copies in 2 months. Definitely a career height moment. Quite possibly it's in the best position it's ever been in, and as some might say, it's all thanks to the fans. But as most will remember, it was not always like this. Today's story is one that begins with disaster, and like many disasters, it began here.
Hi, and welcome to Nintendo's digital event for E3 2015.
In 2015, Wii U owners were suffering. Not that we ever were, but after the year that gave us Smash, Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, Bayonetta 2, we needed to keep the momentum going with more big titles, and 2015 looked like the year for just that. Finally, this was the year that we were going to play the next-gen version of... Alright, so if no Zelda at E3 2015, what is the plan? Well, we can always count on the ever-so-loyal 3DS to carry the weight. Wii U might be selling like stiff anus, but this little guy just never stops, right? Well, this dichotomy of underperforming console, better-performing handheld would not be safe for much longer, very particularly at a borderline coincidental level until E3 2015. This one is just brutal to watch. Not only does it have lots of effort and budget, not only was it Iwata's last E3, I swear to you, it's so cursed. Almost every single game they revealed during this thing was, or would be, doomed to upset. Even the games we already knew about that were just getting shown more would also suffer a similar fate. Star Fox Zero, Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, Fire Emblem Fates, Animal Crossing, Amiibo Festival, just to name a few lowest points in the series games. It's insane looking back on this. Have you ever seen a company take more L's in one presentation?
Hi.
I think the cruel irony of the whole showcase was that so many of these games fans were asking for, and Nintendo gave them to us with one little twist. Fans wanted Animal Crossing on the Wii U? We got this. Fans wanted Paper Mario to be an RPG again? We got this. Fans wanted to see where the SMT and Fire Emblem were in Tokyo Mirage? That's a video for another day anyway. And most importantly, fans wanted Metroid. To paint you a picture, it had been 5 years without Metroid and roughly 8 years without a good one. Fans were starving and Nintendo threw not a single bone. Yeah, they had their vague teases, we hope we can make some more Metroid in the future type of statements. But the next year would be Metroid's 30th anniversary, and we weren't giving up. We just wanted a piece of artwork, a tweet, an acknowledgement. They couldn't just leave the series here. We would take literally anything. Well, wait a minute. No one, not a single person, thought that what they had just watched would become Metroid. It would be like essentially watching this, and then it was pure betrayal. The colors, the sports, the art style, none of it was Metroid, and yet somehow it was. In the middle of one of their worst E3s, this was an unbelievably tone-deaf act on part of Nintendo, and it became immediately obvious they were attempting to capitalize on a drought, with leaks kindling the suspicions that the Metroid title was slapped on a product last minute, plus the fact that Blast Ball was announced 2 days before and no one gave a shit. And the reactions were some of the most feral the company had seen to that point. If you were around for E3 of if you were anywhere on the internet in June 2015, you could feel the rage emanating. But the best examples to me will always be the reaction videos. It's almost always people seeing this new stuff, not really being attentive or engaged, but the minute the Metroid logo pulls up, it's...
Oh my god, there's your Metroid game!
What? 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 No! Oh my god!
Videos like these were as hilarious as they were heartbreaking. You could see those patient, dedicated fans learn in real time just what Nintendo had planned for their loyalty to the series. It was insulting. Not everyone immediately hated it, but the response was strong enough to get Nintendo to go on damage control, which they had to do a lot in this time frame. And they did this using the person who they felt the fan base could trust the most, Reggie.
I'm Ryan McCaffrey for IGN News. Nintendo has acknowledged fan reaction to Metroid Prime Federation Force has been largely negative, saying, quote, "There's no sugarcoating it." Nintendo of America boss Reggie Fils-aime acknowledged that fans were disappointed not to see a traditional Metroid Prime game make an appearance, especially given how high fan demand has been, but that the company was adamant it had to avoid older franchises becoming stale. We have to be the ones to constantly challenge the paradigms, challenge the conventional wisdom, challenge what we thought was the essence of the particular franchise and a particular form of gameplay.
Honestly, I think Reggie was right, but at that particular point in time, not exactly what we wanted to hear. Going back 10 years from then, it was Other M, Metroid Prime 3, Metroid Prime Hunters, and Metroid Prime Pinball. They had been challenging the formula for a long time. We just wanted a traditional Metroid. He was right. But he justified the company saying, "We know what our fans want. We will also push the envelope in developing something that we know is high quality and that we know will deliver in the marketplace." Then he goes on to compare it to Wind Waker, saying the biggest gripe was with visuals and the whiplash going from Majora's Mask to... Okay, anyone with a brain can figure out that while Wind Waker looks different, it's still Zelda at its core. Reggie's wording in these battles with the press, or rather, press turn battles, feels more spokesperson-y than actual person with faith in the product. Later that summer, he'd do an interview where he said Nintendo anticipated negative backlash for Federation Force, and essentially that if and when gamers could just play it, they would understand that it's actually a fun game. And as we'll discuss, that statement is not super far from the truth, but it still didn't help anyone to see it as more deserving of the title Metroid Prime. And therefore, none of this worked at all. The result was this, and unsurprisingly, this. And eventually, we even somehow got to this, which is where the irony comes in. Metroid Prime Federation Force was a game that caused so much resentment that it literally set records, but at some point in these past 8 years, all of that public fallout dried up and the game became sought after. So how and why? Well, perhaps now would actually be a good time to sit down and have a look at Federation Force, but it doesn't run well in Citra, so in the meantime, why don't we just give a quick rundown on Metroid for anyone who's not familiar? I'm sure I could turn this into a whole series, but allow me to summarize the grand plot of Metroid in 3 words. Woman destroys everything. See, it's a joke because you don't just quickly rattle off a series like Metroid. Its themes of exploration, atmosphere, and progression are unmatched, and so much to the point that it's got partial custody of a whole genre. The first time I played this game, I hated it because it threw me on a planet and told me nothing. The next time I played this game, I loved it because it threw me on a planet and told me nothing. Arriving in a cultivated but abandoned ecosystem, wandering around and using the environment to figure everything out, why this dominant species with their advanced technology couldn't last. It's as every bit wondrous as it is horrifying to discover the inner secrets of each setting, which is where Metroid's most pristine moments come in, the difficulty. Samus is a badass one-woman army, but she has to earn that title, and only through battle after battle. I stand by that this is one of Nintendo's last consistently difficult series, and until we see Punch-Out and Donkey Kong revived, Dread is the modern Nintendo. Yes, there's the whole organic life's yearning for power and how they mishandle it every time bit going, the punishments that come from modifying biomes if you really want to get deep and philosophical. So when we fast forward all the way to Federation Force, where is any of this? Oh yeah. Alright, spoiler alert. Metroid Prime Federation Force is the classic move of a name where it does not belong. This is not Metroid. This is a completely separate game that Nintendo thought they could market better by slapping Metroid on it. Oh, a little deja vu. That hurt my throat. Yeah, this usually never works because when you attach it to a pre-existing franchise, we now have expectations. Very good, Reggie. Here's a Yoshi's cookie. And nowhere in those expectations were jagged chibi art style, multiplayer focused gameplay, and soccer. Where's the upgrades? Where's Samus Aran? I wish I didn't have the answer to that question. No, so what this is a mission-based co-op shooter on the Nintendo 3DS, meaning the controls are a little rough to get used to and the lack of voice chat really does not help with communication. Nintendo choosing again to just play it safe with pre-selected phrases. It reminded me a lot of the Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon multiplayer, and that's when I realized this is 100% exactly that. You see, both Luigi's Mansion 2 or Dark Moon and Metroid Prime Federation Force were developed by Next Level Games, which is actually a hilarious pun. And both of these games received almost identical criticism, that they took properties heavily focused on atmosphere and exploration, cut them up into a level-based format, and turned down the fear factor with a simplified and toonish art style. There was a huge loss of values in both, and it was seemingly justified by the inclusion of multiplayer because misery loves miserable company, I guess. People were less hard on Luigi's Mansion as it was a Mario-based spin-off and had just one game before it. But for those thirsty, die-hard Metroid fans, this was what the fuck! The whole shtick of atmosphere is to feel organic, but using a level select menu to transport to Winter Planet, Hot Planet, and Hot Planet 2? No! The environments were easily forgettable, the enemies too repetitive, and the mission objectives, well, I was pleasantly surprised at the stealth missions, and I wanted to end my life with the escort and protect missions. The bosses are pretty frustrating alone. Sokkin, for example, has an insta-kill move that wouldn't be as big of a deal in multiplayer, but kept killing me and therefore ending the mission. I guess you could say that when it comes to this boss fight, I was Sokkin. That's when I realized that the game is not scaled for single player. You get some higher stats and some drones, but that's not going to help you in the protection missions. No, this game is meant to be played with others. It's pretty clear the single player was an afterthought, and it's much more enjoyable with teammates, but if it was a flop at launch, you can imagine what it's like trying to find homies 7 years later. Still, being a co-op first-person shooter on the 3DS, and in 2016, that's pretty damn remarkable. Let that sink in, a first-person shooter with online co-op on the frickin' 3-square. You know, the console with the 240p screen? And though the art style is a bit off-putting, I will admit the game looks very impressive and those big-ass, chunky, chibi enemies make headshots a lot easier, said the man who is bad at first-person shooting. It's a sad situation altogether because no, it's not Metroid, but off that scale, it's also not a bad game. I understand that within the title it has every reason to be compared to the rest, that's my channel in a nutshell. And just like those games, it's nowhere near as good when compared to the rest in its tack-on series. That said, it is nowhere near as bad as everyone has treated it. Nintendo did not deserve the hatred milestones that people gave them for this, though I do understand why that was the general reaction. Its launch closed out the second longest period in between Metroid games ever, and this was not the comeback the series needed. Fans were desperate, and Nintendo found out just how badly. Mind you, this was the era of Nintendo seemingly doing everything to piss us off, specifically the Metroid fans, so I get the back and forth. But underneath it all is an interesting spin-off idea for the franchise that was somewhat fumbled mostly because of the 2 words in its name. Hated not for what it was, but for when it was. And also kinda for what it was. Listen, bottom line, it was a decent game with cool concepts, but also a few issues. I think these issues could totally be addressed if the game was ever brought to the Switch, but half of its integrity comes from it being on the 3DS, and due to obvious reasons, I don't see Nintendo visiting it again anytime soon. I feel like they were definitely over this game the minute it came out, ready to wipe away one of the messiest chapters they'd ever had. Because now, they had every reason to move forward. See, Federation Force taught a lot of lessons, but for Nintendo, it also taught them how passionate and serious the Metroid fanbase was. A petition, a boycott, a whole-ass fan-made game, a whole-ass plethora of spiritual successor indies. If they could create such a frenzy for a game they didn't like, they could sure as hell show their support for one they did. And when coupled with all of the fresh new eyes from the E3 2015 media circus, it was go time. Time to turn this whole fiasco into the best possible redemption arc, and boom. Just a year later, they said, fuck it, why don't we show off a logo for a game that we're not even close to forming the thought of, and also remake the most dated Metroid experience for modern audiences, which began development in, 2015. Of course, Samus Returns wasn't free of pressure either, because if it did poorly, it may have taken all of 2D Metroid with it, but we know how that one ended. And that is the story of how Nintendo turned their catastrophic 2016 into a shiny, magnificent 2017. Never give up. Just because a company may be insensitive to what their fans want, doesn't mean they can't learn.